The wind cut like broken glass across the empty fields outside Detroit. Winter had stripped the land bare, leaving only rust and silence behind. Old Man Harlan's junkyard stretched out in the darkness, a graveyard of steel and forgotten machines. Car doors clanged in the wind. Sheets of metal shivered like bones. A thin layer of fog clung to the mounds of wreckage, making the place feel less like a junkyard and more like a cemetery. Among the twisted silhouettes of broken engines and shattered glass, a girl moved quietly, almost invisible. Her name was Mia Carta, 13 years old, small for her age, with sharp eyes that never stopped scanning for value in the trash of others. She wore a patched jacket 2 sizes too big, the sleeves frayed, her sneakers held together by duct tape. In the daylight, she blended into the background of the town. At night, she belonged to the shadows. To the people in town, Mia was the junkyard girl. They watched her from behind cracked windows or from across the counter of a corner store. Their eyes carried the same weight of pity, sometimes even fear. They whispered about her grandmother, Evelyn Carter. Too old and too sick to work, they whispered about the way Mia scavenged cans and scrap metal to sell for a few dollars. Just enough to buy food, sometimes medicine. In their eyes, she wasn't a child. She was a reminder of failure, and reminders made people uncomfortable. But Mia didn't have time to care what people thought. Tonight, the cold pressed harder than usual, and the air burned her lungs as she breathed. She stuffed her hands deeper into her jacket, clutching the wire cutters she'd found weeks ago. Her bag already held a few pounds of copper wire, stripped from old appliances she'd scavenged earlier. Not enough. Never enough. Her grandmother's cough had grown worse in the past few days. Deep, rattling, with spots of blood staining the handkerchief. The medicine they'd been using was gone. If Mia didn't bring in enough scrap tonight, Evelyn would spend another night shivering in their little shack at the edge of the woods, her chest aching with every breath. The junkyard was dangerous at night. The ground was slick with ice. Sharp edges waited under every step, but Mia knew its pathways like the back of her hand. She had walked these piles of broken steel since she was 7, learning where to climb and where the ground gave way. She knew which wrecks had been picked clean, and which still held secrets worth a few dollars. She moved quietly between stacks of old cars, her breath fogging in the freezing air. A crow stirred from its perch and flapped away into the night. Somewhere far off, a train's horn echoed across the empty fields. Her stomach growled. She ignored it. Hunger was familiar, like the cold. Both could be pushed aside if she kept her mind sharp. She reached the back of the yard where the cars sat in layers, one stacked on top of the other, their windows shattered, their doors hanging open like broken mouths. Mira pulled herself up onto the hood of a rusted pickup and began yanking at a tangle of wires. The copper would fetch a decent price in the morning. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to the townspeople again, the looks they gave her, the way they crossed the street when she walked by. They didn't know what it was like to count every coin, to wonder if tomorrow there'd be food. They didn't know what it was like to stand in line at the pharmacy and feel the stares burning into her back. But Mia wasn't doing this for them. She was doing it for her grandmother. Evelyn was all she had left, and if the world thought she was nothing but a scavenger, so be it. She dropped the stripped wires into her bag and glanced around. The junkyard seemed quieter than usual, too quiet. Even the wind had stilled, leaving only the groan of shifting metal. For a moment, she stood frozen, listening, her pulse quickened. Something about the silence felt wrong. She pulled her jacket tighter and stepped down from the pickup. Her boots crunched in the frost as she moved deeper into the shadows. She thought she heard something faint, muffled, not the wind, not the usual creak of the junkyard. It sounded like a voice, a low, broken sound, and beneath it, the unmistakable growl of an animal. Mia stopped. Her heart raced. Somewhere, hidden among the carcasses of forgotten cars, something or someone was trapped. She should turn back. She should run, but her feet didn't move. Instead, she tightened her grip on the wire cutters, grew in a shaky breath, and followed the sound into the dark. The sound came again, soft at first, almost a breath, then a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the frozen air. Mia froze beside a mountain of rusted refrigerators. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her canvas bag. She knew the night noises of the junkyard: loose chains, shifting steel, the distant whistle of freight trains. This was none of those. It was coming from deeper inside, toward the far corner where the oldest cars were stacked like crooked tombstones, the place no one bothered with anymore. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. Instinct screamed leave, slip out through the gap in the fence, head back to the shack, pretend she never heard a thing. The smart move, but the sound came again. A human noise, this time weak, muffled, followed by another growl, not angry, not wild, more like a warning. Mia's breath clouded in the freezing air. Someone was in there or something. She thought of her grandmother, Evelyn, waiting back in the shack, coughing against the thin quilt. If Mia disappeared tonight, Evelyn would never know why. No one in town would come searching. They'd just shrugged. Another lost kid in a city that didn't care. She took a single step forward, then stopped. What if it's a trap? The junkyard wasn't exactly off limits to trouble. Sometimes drifters camped out here, men who stared too long and smiled too wide. And there were dogs, half-wild strays that hunted in packs when the hunger got bad. The growl came again, low and strained, followed by a sharp clang of metal. Mia flinched. Her imagination painted flashes of teeth and shadow, of someone waiting just beyond the fog. She could walk away. She could walk away. But a different voice whispered in her head, the one that sounded like her grandmother on the nights they still had electricity and read library books by a single lamp. If you hear someone in trouble and you can help, you don't just walk away. Mia, that's not who we are. Mia cursed under her breath, a habit she'd picked up from the scrapyard workers. Her sneakers slid on the frost as she moved toward the sound. The fog thickened, the deeper she went, wrapping the broken cars in ghostly halos. Her flashlight was weak, the batteries nearly dead. She capped it off. The glow might give her away. Instead, she trusted the pale moonlight glinting off the edges of chrome and shattered glass. There beneath a sagging top mottled with rust stains, a dog-shaped shivered, the outline of a sedan, long and heavy, a Chevy Impala, late 90s maybe. Its paint scabbed with corrosion. The top rippled once, as if something inside the car shifted. Mia crouched low, her breath coming fast. The sound was clearer now, a faint, strangled moan, followed by the deep rumble of an animal warning, not feral rage, something tired, wounded. Her eyes darted to the gate behind her. She could still turn back, melt into the night, pretend none of this existed, but she knew she wouldn't. She slid closer, the frozen gravel crunching under her shoes. Her wire cutters felt absurdly small in her hand, no weapon, just a tool. Another clang echoed from inside the car, then a hoarse, desperate whisper. She couldn't make out the words, only the plea hidden inside them. Hello. Her voice cracked in the cold. Is someone there? The growl answered, first deep, vibrating through the metal. Mia stiffened but didn't retreat. After a beat, a rasping voice followed, so faint she barely caught it. Help. The word sliced through the night. Mia swallowed hard. Whoever was inside that Chevy wasn't just stuck. They were hurt, badly. She edged to the trunk, her hands trembling. The top smelled of oil and old rain. Through a gap she saw a faint glimmer of metal hinges, a streak of something dark, blood. Fear pressed against her ribs, but something stronger pushed back, curiosity, duty, that stubborn streak her grandmother called a deteriorates. She whispered to herself, okay, and reached for the corner of the top. The cold bit her fingertips as she peeled it back. The Chevy emerged from the fog like a sleeping beast, its chrome bumper catching the moonlight. From inside the trunk came another weak plea, followed by the wary rumble of a dog's growl. Mia gripped the cutters tighter. Whatever waited inside, she couldn't leave it there. She took a breath so deep it burned her lungs, stepped closer, and set her mind on the lock. Mia glanced over her shoulder one last time. The junkyard was still. Only the groan of distant metal answered her fear. Her pulse hammered as she gripped the rusted steel bar she'd found earlier. It wasn't much, just a bent length of iron pipe, but it was better than nothing. The trunk lock of the old Chevy Impala was caked with grime, the kind that resisted years of storms. Mia wedged the tip of the bar into the crack and pressed down with all her weight. The lock didn't budge. She tried again, her small frame straining, the cold metal biting into her palms. For a moment she thought she couldn't do it, that whoever was inside would stay trapped. Then, with a loud snap, the lock gave. The lid jumped half an inch, releasing a breath of air that smelled of rust, sweat, and blood. Mia froze. For a heartbeat, she considered bolting, but a sound from inside, the muffled groan of a man, pulled her closer. She pushed the lid open. What she saw stole the breath from her chest. A man lay curled in the cramped darkness. He was older than her father would have been, maybe mid, with a square jaw hidden beneath stubble and skin marked by bruises. Dried blood streaked across his temple. His hands were bound tight with duct tape, his ankles the same. A filthy rag gagged his mouth. His chest rose and fell in shallow, painful breaths. Beside him, squeezed into the corner, was a German shepherd. The dog's amber eyes glowed in the dim light, locked on Mia's every move. Its growl rumbled low, protective though weak. One of its front legs was twisted awkwardly, swollen and raw with bruising. Mia's first instinct was to step back, A dog like that could tear her apart, but she saw the tremble in its body, the way it pressed against the man's side as if guarding him with the last of its strength. "Easy," Mia whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I'm not here to hurt you." The shepherd growled again, but softer this time. Its gaze didn't waver. Mia crawled closer, her knees scraping against the icy ground. She pulled the rag from the man's mouth. He coughed hard, gasping for air, before trying to speak. His voice was hoarse, broken. "Please help us." The words hit Mia harder than the winter wind. She fumbled for the duct tape at his wrists, peeling it back with shaking fingers. Her hands were clumsy, numb with cold, but she worked until the tape finally tore. The man groaned as he stretched his freed arms, then looked at her for the first time. His eyes, clouded with exhaustion, carried something fierce beneath the pain. "My name," he rasped, pausing to swallow. Jack Donovan." Mia nodded, not sure what to say. Names didn't matter much in her world, but this one carried weight. "And him," Jack whispered, shifting a shoulder toward the dog that stooped, as if on cue. The German shepherd's growl faded. The animal studied Mia for a long moment, then cautiously lowered its head and stretched out its tongue. The rough, unexpected warmth of the lick brushed across her hand. Mia blinked, startled. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was trust, small, fragile, but real. Jack noticed too. A tired smile ghosted across his face. "If Duke trusts you, so do I." For the first time all night, Mia felt something shift inside her, a flicker of connection. She wasn't just a scavenger in the junkyard anymore. She was the only hope these two had left. She reached out, stroking Duke's fur gently, and whispered, "We need to get you out of here." The wind howled through the wreckage around them, as if reminding her that danger was never far away. Somewhere beyond the junkyard, engines growled faintly, headlights sweeping the night. Whoever had locked Jack and Duke in that trunk might not be gone for good. Mia tightened her grip on the iron bar. Her world had just changed, and there was no turning back. Jack leaned against the rim of the Chevy's trunk, one hand gripping the edge to steady himself. His breath came ragged, every inhale sharp with pain. Still, his voice carried a steel Mia hadn't heard from any grown man in a long time. "They'll be back," he said, eyes darting across the shadows of the junkyard. "We can't stay here. We have to move now." Mia swallowed hard. Her heart was still pounding from the rescue, but Jack's warning cut through the fear like broken glass. Then it came, an echo that froze them both. Eek. The sound of the front gate creaking open. Rusted hinges screamed in protest as someone forced their way inside. Mia's stomach flipped. The junkyard was no longer abandoned. "Help me up," Jack whispered. She slipped her shoulder beneath his arm, struggling against his weight. Jack was taller, heavier than she could manage, but somehow they found a rhythm. Duke limped close to Jack's side, his injured leg dragging, his ears alert to every sound. Mia's breath clouded in the cold as she whispered, "This way." She knew the junkyard like a second skin. Years of scavenging had taught her its hidden pathways, its rusted corridors of stacked cars and twisted beams. It was a labyrinth, dangerous but familiar, and tonight, it was their only chance. They moved quickly, or as quickly as Jack's injuries allowed. Every few steps he stumbled, forcing Mia to hold tighter, to ignore the burning ache in her own arms. The German shepherd pressed ahead, sniffing the air, ears twitching with every distant crunch of boots on gravel. Then came voices. 2 men, maybe 3, their tones sharp and angry. The words carried across the yard. "Should have finished him off. Boss wants proof. Checked in Palma." Mia's chest tightened. They were heading straight for the car they'd just left behind. "Hurry," she hissed. Jack didn't argue. His jaw clenched, his face pale, but his focus was unshakable. The soldier in him hadn't vanished. It'd just been beaten down, waiting for this moment to surface again. Mia guided them through a narrow passage between a mountain of washing machines and the gutted remains of a school bus. The metal groaned as Duke brushed against it, his nails clicking on the frozen ground. The men's voices grew louder. Flashlights began to sweep the yard, beams cutting through the fog like knives. One of them struck the Impala, revealing the popped trunk, the torn tape. "Damn it," one of the men roared. Mia flinched, pressing Jack lower behind a rusted hood. Her lungs burned from holding her breath. Duke let out a soft whine, and she quickly stroked his head, whispering, "She boy." "Not yet." Jack's hand gripped her arm, steady but firm. His whisper was gravel rough. "You're saving our lives right now. Don't stop." They crawled deeper into the maze. The junkyard swallowed them, a fortress of broken steel and shadows. But the men weren't far behind. Flashlight beams swung dangerously close, passing just inches from where Mia crouched. Her instincts screamed to run, but running meant noise, running meant they'd all be caught. She chose patience, inching forward only when the beams moved away. Every step was measured, deliberate, silent. She felt like a ghost slipping between the bones of the junkyard at last. The outer fence loomed a hedge-jaggled chain link crowned with bobbed wire. Beyond it, the frozen fields stretched into the dark, empty and open. Jack's voice was tight. "We'll never clear that fence in time." Mia shook her head. "There's another way. Come on." She led them toward the far corner, where the fence sagged against a pile of scrap. Years ago, she'd discovered a gap at the bottom just wide enough to crawl through if you were desperate. She had used it more times than she could count. When they reached it, she dropped to her knees and tugged at the bent wire. The gap was still there, just big enough for Duke to squeeze through. "Go," she whispered. The shepherd didn't hesitate. He crawled low, whining softly as his injured leg dragged behind him. But he made it through. Mia turned back to Jack. "Your turn." He shook his head. "You first. If they catch me, you run." For a moment, their eyes locked, and though Mia was only 13, she recognized the tone of someone who had lived with sacrifice. She wanted to argue, but the flashlights were closing in. With a grunt, she slid through the hole, the wire tearing at her coat. She popped out the other side, scrambled to her feet, and turned back. Jack was struggling. His body resisted every movement, ribs aching, muscles failing. But Sharwell pushed him forward. He collapsed halfway, gasping, before dragging himself the rest of the way through. By the time he hit the ground outside, Mia was already pulling at his arm, whispering, get up, we have to move." Behind them, a shout split the night. They're getting out." The junkyard erupted with pounded footsteps, but Mia, Jack, and Duke were already running into the fog, into the frozen fields, into the unknown, and for the first time in years, Mia felt something she hadn't dared to believe in: hope. The field was nothing but frozen mud and brittle grass, stretching toward the dark silhouette of the town beyond. The junkyard's shouts still echoed behind them, but the fog swallowed their pursuers, biding precious seconds. Mia pushed forward, her lungs burning, her legs numb from the cold. Jack stumbled beside her, barely staying upright. His weight leaned heavier and heavier on her shoulder until, at last, she spotted salvation rising from the haze. A weather-beaten barn, long abandoned, its roof sagging like the spine of some ancient animal. "Almost there," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if Jack even heard. His steps had turned clumsy, his breaths ragged. Duke limped ahead, ears pricked, his dark silhouette a steady guide in the night. The barn's door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Mia shoved it open just enough for them to slip inside. The air smelled of dust and old hay, a stale dampness that clung to her throat. But the walls rotting though, they were offered shelter. For now, that was enough. Jack collapsed the moment they crossed the threshold. His body crumpled against the dirt floor, a groan slipping from his throat before silence claimed him. Mira knelt beside him, panic rising. "Jack." She shook his shoulder. No response. His chest still moved, slow and shallow. Relief washed through her, chased by fear. He was alive, but barely. Her hands trembled as she pulled hay into a makeshift bedding beneath him. She covered him with an old top she found in the corner, whispering to herself as much as to him, "You'll be okay. You have to be." Duke circled twice before settling down beside his master, his head resting protectively near Jack's arm. His amber eyes lifted to Mia, soft but watchful, as if passing judgment. She braced herself for a growl, for a teeth, but instead, he let out a deep sigh and stretched his body closer to hers. For the first time in years, Mia felt the strange warmth of protection, not from walls, not from locks, but from something living, breathing, loyal. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring at Jack's battered face, in the dim light seeping through the bond's broken slats. He looked worn down, scarred by battles she couldn't imagine. He wasn't like the townsfolk who sneered at her, who muttered "trash girl" when she passed. His pain was real, carved into his skin, and somehow it made him less frightening. Mia listened. Outside, the night stretched on, broken only by the distant hum of a passing truck, the cry of an owl, and the relentless beating of her own heart. Each sound made her stiffen, ready to bolt. Yet Duke's steady breathing anchored her. The dog's presence dulled the sharp edges of her fear. She let her mind wander, just a little, to a grandmother's cough, rattling in the darkness of their makeshift shelter near the river, to the faces of the shopkeepers who turned her away when she tried to buy medicine, to the gnawing hunger that had been her only companion most nights. And now this, a man she barely knew, broken and hunted, a dog who trusted her without words. Her life had been about survival, nothing more. But tonight, sitting in that abandoned barn, she felt something stir. Responsibility, connection, the fragile thread of belonging she had never dared to dream of. She reached out, hesitant, and rested her fingers against Duke's fur. The shepherd's ears twitched, but he didn't pull away. His steady warmth seeped into her frozen skin. "Guess we're all stuck together now," she whispered. The dog thumped his tail once, a quiet agreement in the silence. Mia leaned her head back against the wall, exhaustion finally overtaking her. For once, she let her eyes drift closed, trusting that Duke would hear danger before she did. Jack stirred faintly in his sleep, a soldier's restlessness even in unconsciousness. Words tumbled from his lips, broken fragments of another world. Fallujah, hold the line. Mir didn't understand, but the weight of them settled heavy in the barn's darkness. He carried ghosts, same as she did. Outside, the night pressed on. The pursuers might still be searching, the town might still be cruel, and the world might still be merciless. But inside the barn, for this one fragile moment, Mia wasn't alone. And in that sliver of warmth, of protection, a seed of hope quietly took root. Dawn never truly broke in the outskirts of Detroit. It seeped in slow and gray, filtering through factory smoke and the skeletal trees lining the river. By the time Mia led Jack and Duke across the frozen field, the world was painted in dull ash, the kind that made everything look colder than it already was. Their destination crouched on the edge of the woods, a shack of weathered boards and patched tops, smoke trickling thinly from a crooked stovepipe. It was nothing more than a forgotten shell of a house. But for Mia, it was home. Almost there, she muttered, half to Jack, half to herself. Jack leaned heavier on her with every step. His body had the weight of stone, his breath ragged. Duke stayed close, nudging his master whenever he faltered. Mia's grandmother opened the door before they even reached it. Evelyn Carter was in her 70s, her frame bent and brittle, wrapped in a faded shawl that did little to hide the tremor in her hands. A deep cough racked her chest before she could speak, streaks of crimson staining the cloth she pressed to her lips. Mia, her voice was soft but strained. Her eyes flicked from her granddaughter to the bandaged man beside her. "What on God's earth have you brought here?" "Please, Grandma," Mia whispered, urgency cutting through her exhaustion. "He needs help. They were gonna kill him." Evelyn's gaze lingered on Jack Black, barely conscious before settling on the dog. Duke stood tall, despite his limp, his eyes steady, his presence commanding. Something in Evelyn softened. She nodded once. Inside, quick, before anyone sees. The shack was small, barely 2 rooms. Cold air slipped through the gaps in the wood, and the floor creaked under every step. But in the corner, a cast-iron stove glowed faintly, its weak fire offering what little warmth they had. Mia lowered Jack onto a cot made of old blankets and worn-out cushions. He groaned but didn't wake. Evelyn shuffled to a shelf, pulling down a jar of herbs, a chipped bowl, and strips of cloth long past their prime. She worked in silence, grinding leaves, heating water, her hands trembling but sure. When she finally leaned over Jack, pressing a damp cloth to his brow, there was no hesitation. She had spent her life caring for others with scraps and faith. This was no different. Mira hovered nearby, watching as Duke curled at Jack's side, his body protective. Evelyn glanced at Mia. "You've brought danger to our door, child." Her words weren't angry, but heavy, like stones placed carefully in a row. "I couldn't just leave him," Mia whispered. "He'd have died out there." Another cough seized Evelyn, shaking her thin body. She steadied herself against the wall, then offered Mia the faintest smile. "You have your mother's stubborn heart. It'll get you hurt, but it's the only kind worth having." The 3 of them, soldier and dog, sat in the dim light of the shack while Evelyn's potion simmered. The smell of herbs filled the air, sharp and earthy, mixing with the faint smoke from the stove. Later, when Jack stirred, Evelyn spooned the mixture past his cracked lips. He winced, muttered something incoherent, but swallowed. "That's it," she murmured. "Rest now. You'll need your strength." Dinner that night was little more than a thin broth stretched from bones and carrots Mia had scavenged days before. But when Evelyn set the bowls before them, it felt like a feast. Mia slurped her portion quickly, hunger gnawing too loud to savor. Jack managed a few spoonfuls before sleep claimed him again. Duke licked at a plate set aside for him, then returned to his watchful post near the cot. For a moment, in the flicker of the fire, they looked almost like a family. Not the kind Mia saw in the windows of warm houses downtown, but something roar-bound, not by comfort, but by survival. Evelyn's cough returned, harsher, flecks of blood darkening the rag in her hand. She hid it quickly, but Mira saw. She always saw. Mia tightened her grip on her spoon, She didn't have much, no warm bed, no steady meals, but she had her grandmother, and now she had these two strangers whose lives were tangled with hers. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the loose boards of the shack, but inside, the fire held steady, and so did they. In the heart of downtown Detroit, where glass towers scraped the gray sky and neon signs drowned out the stars, Richard Hale sat in his corner office. High above the city he had learned to bend. The room was sleek polished steel, leather chairs, walls lined with plaques and medals that gleamed under soft light. To the world, he was a decorated veteran turned successful businessman, a man who had traded battlefields for boardrooms. But behind the expensive suit and the polished smile lay something else. A predator. Hale leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of bourbon as he scanned the latest report on his desk. Jack Donovan, alive, missing, his lips curved into something between amusement and irritation. Persistent, "Aunt, you old friend." The word friend was a lie. Once they had worn the same uniform. Once they had stood shoulder to shoulder in the sandstorms of Iraq, bound by brotherhood. But war had a way of stripping in bare, revealing who they really were. Hale had chosen profit. Jack had chosen loyalty. That difference had set them on opposite sides of a line that could never be crossed back years ago. Hale had orchestrated the covert deal that lined his pocket, smuggling weapons under the guise of military supply. Jack had uncovered it, refused to look the other way. The fallout should have ended Hale's career, but instead he had twisted the narrative. He framed Jack, accused him of treason, left him disgraced, haunted, and alone. And now, somehow, Jack had crawled back into the light. Hale set the burden down and pressed a button on his desk phone. "Send in Walker." A moment later, a tall man in a tailored coat entered. His eyes were cold, his movements efficient. "Like many of Hale's men, you have the message ready?" Hale asked. Walker nodded. "Already circulating. Posters, flyers, word on the street. 1,000 cash for any information leading to Donovan's capture." Hale smirked. In a city where most people couldn't scrape together $50, 1,000 was a fortune. Desperation would do the hunting for him. "And the story?" Hale pressed. "Exactly as you wanted. We're painting him as a traitor, dishonorable discharge, suspected ties to radicals. People are buying it. Good lies didn't need to be airtight. They just needed to stick." Hale had learned that long ago. Once you planted the seed of doubt, the truth was irrelevant. He rose from his chair and moved toward the floor-to-ceiling window. Detroit sprawled beneath him, roosting factories, struggling neighborhoods, streets crawling with both poverty and power. He saw it all as pieces on a board. And Jack Donovan, battered but breathing, was the one piece that threatened to topple the game. Hale's reflection in the glass was sharp, eyes glinting with the same hunger that had carried him through war. Power wasn't earned. It was taken. He had taken his. And he wasn't about to let an old ghost strip it away. "Keep the pressure on," he said. "Police, City Hall, everyone. I want his face on every wall by morning. Make sure no one can hide him." Walker hesitated. "Sir, what if someone already is?" Hale turned, his expression darkening. "Then we make an example of him. No one defies me. Not in this city." The words carried weight because they were true. Hale's reach extended far beyond his office. Politicians shook his hand at ribbon cuttings. Police chiefs took his calls in the middle of the night. And judges looked the other way when his name crossed their desks. His power wasn't loud, it was insidious, woven into the very fabric of the city. And yet Jack Donovan had survived. Hale tapped a finger against the glass, thinking, the man doesn't quit. That's what makes him dangerous. Walker shifted uneasily. "And the girl? Rumors say a kid might have helped him at the Junkyard for the first time." Hale's smirk faltered. "A child." The thought irritated him. Collateral was inevitable, but children complicated things. They stirred sympathy, muddied the story. He couldn't allow that thread to unravel. "Find her," Hale said coldly, quietly. "If Donovan is help, I want it cut off before it grows." Walker nodded once, then slipped out of the office as silent as he had entered. Hale returned to his desk. Lowering himself into the leather chair with a weary grace, he picked up the bourbon again, savoring the burn. Outside, the city lights flickered, restless, alive. Jack Donovan thought he could claw his way back from the grave. But Richard Hale had built an empire on the bones of better men. He had no intention of letting one stubborn soldier tear it down. As the night stretched on, the reward posters hit the streets. $1,000. Jack Donovan's name smeared in ink, his picture plastered on brick walls and bulletin boards. Whispers spread in bars, in alleys, in the dim corners of shelters where hunger gnawed loudest. And somewhere in the shadows, the hunters began to circle. Jack didn't know it yet, but the city had turned against him. His enemy wasn't just Hale, It was every desperate hand reaching for a bounty, every eye trained to spot a scarred soldier and his loyal dog. The net was tightening, and Richard Hale, from his glass tower above it all, smiled like a man pulling strings on a puppet show only he understood. The shack creaked under the weight of the wind, every loose plank whispering secrets into the night. Mia had gotten used to those sounds, groans and sighs of wood that was half dead but still holding together. But tonight there was something else in the air, something alive. Duke stirred first, his ears perked, muscles tensing, a low growl humming deep in his throat. Mia sat up instantly, heart rasping. She clutched the rusty pipe she kept by the door, eyes narrowing at the shifting shadows outside. Then came the knock, not heavy, not demanding 3 quick taps. A pause, then 2 more. A rhythm, a code. Jack stirred from his makeshift bed, groaning as he tried to sit up. Evelyn, coughing softly by the fire, turned her frail head toward the door. Mia stood frozen, her grip tight on the pipe. "Open it," Jack rasped. His voice was steady, though his body trembled with weakness. "That's not Hale's men. That's a signal, I know." Mia hesitated, then slid the door open just enough to see. 2 figures stepped into the faint glow of the firelight. A man, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes and the kind of jaw that had seen too many battles. Beside him, a woman, lean and steady, with a presence that felt both calm and unshakable. "Jack," the man said, voice low but warm. "Hell, it's been a long time." Jack's eyes widened. "Mark Rivers, and Dana Lopez," the woman added, setting a duffel bag on the floor. She glanced at Mia, then at Duke, who had stopped growling and wagged his tail once. Cautiously, Mia's stomach tightened. Strangers. Strangers meant danger. Strangers meant betrayal. She kept the pipe raised, not moving. Mark caught the gesture and raised his hands slowly. "Palms open. Easy, kid. We're here because Jack saved our lives once. We don't forget debts like that." Dana crouched, unzipping the duffel. Inside were cans of food, sealed water bottles, and small boxes of medicine. The scent of something familiar, chicken noodle soup from a con, wafted up, and Mia's stomach betrayed her with a low growl. "We brought supplies," Dana said gently. "And this," she pulled out a battered boner phone, its casing scratched but functional. "Secure line. We can't stay long, but you'll need a way to reach us." Jack looked at them with a mix of relief and suspicion. "If Hale finds out you're here, he won't," Mark cut in, his jaw tightening. "We didn't survive Fallujah to get taken down by a desk jockey like Hale. We know what he's become, Jack. The lies he spread about you, we never bought them." Mia lowered the pipe just a little, but her eyes stayed hard. "How do we know you're not working with him?" she snapped. Mark glanced at Dana, then back at Mia. "You don't?" "Trust has to be earned." He nodded at Duke. "But sometimes, trust is decided for us." As if on cue, Duke limped forward, pressing his muzzle into Mark's hand. The big man's expression softened, his fingers scratching behind the shepherd's ear. "Good boy," he murmured. "Still got fight in you." Mia's chest tightened. She had lived most of her life on the edge of people's contempt, watching them look at her like she was dirt under their shoes. Trust wasn't something she gave easily, and yet here was Duke, her only shield in this storm, leaning into this stranger like they were old friends. Evelyn coughed violently, blood spotting the rag in her hand. Dana moved fast, kneeling by her side with a calmness Mia envied. She pulled out a small bottle of pills, tilting one into Evelyn's palm. "This will help with the coughing," she said softly. "Not a cure, but it'll ease the pain." Mia's throat tightened as she watched her grandmother swallow the pill with shaking hands. The gratitude in Evelyn's eyes was enough to crack Mia's defenses, if only a little. Jack leaned back against the wall, eyes scanning the dim shack. "We can't stay here long. Hale's got ears everywhere. He's painting me as a traitor, and with a price on my head. The wrong kind of people will come sniffing around." Mark nodded. "Then we'll move you, quietly. We've got a safe place outside Monroe. Old farmhouse. It's off-grid." Mia bristled. "You think we're just going to walk out with you? What if this is a trap?" For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Duke padded back to Mia, pressing his head against her small hand. She felt his steady warmth, his silent reassurance. Dana's voice was calm, almost motherly. "Sometimes, the hardest part is knowing when to stop fighting alone." Mia wanted to argue, to push back, to scream that strangers had never been anything but cruel to her. But the truth was, the shack was a cage, and Hale's shadow was getting longer every day. She looked at Evelyn, who was breathing easier now. She looked at Jack, bruised and broken but unyielding. She looked at Duke, whose trust seemed effortless. And for the first time in a long time, Mia felt something she couldn't name. Maybe it was hope. The fire in the shack had burned low, throwing only faint shadows against the warped wood. Evelyn sat close to the embers, a wool blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her eyes, tired but sharp, followed Jack as he shifted, testing the strength that was still slow to return. "You can't let anyone know you're here," Evelyn whispered, her voice cutting through the stillness. Each word came with effort, as though dragged out by the illness that weighed on her chest. "That man Hale, he has more power than you realize. Money, influence, people who owe him favors." Her warning hung heavy in the cold air. Mia knelt by her grandmother, adjusting the blanket, her jaw set. She had heard it all before. The danger, the reach of men like Hale, the impossibility of standing against them. But hearing it now, with Jack and Duke under their fragile roof, it carried a new kind of weight. Jack met Evelyn's eyes. He understood. He'd seen what power unchecked could do, how corruption seeped into every crack of a community. He'd watched good men vanish under false charges, reputations destroyed overnight. Hale wasn't just a rival, he was a cancer spreading through every institution that should have stood against him. "I won't let him touch you," Jack said quietly. His voice was steady, though his body still bore the marks of betrayal, bruises dark against pale skin, ribs aching with each breath. "You've already risked more than you should. Letting me in, that means something, and I don't forget debts." Evelyn's lips trembled into the faintest smile. She had lived long enough to know promises often broke under the weight of reality. But the fire in Jack's tone stood something, a reminder of younger days when men spoke of honor and meant it. The next morning, frost lay thick across the field outside. Mia slipped from the shack before dawn, Duke following until she raised a hand and shook her head. "Stay," she whispered. The dog whined softly but obeyed, padding back to curl beside Jack. Mia tucked her thin coat tighter and started toward town. Each step bit into her bones with cold, but she pressed on. Evelyn's cough had worsened, and the pills Dana brought wouldn't last. She needed more medicine, and that meant braving the very people who'd long ago decided she was nothing more than trash. The town was waking when she reached it. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and shopkeepers lifted shutters with the same tired rhythm as yesterday. As Mia walked down Main Street, the looks, bagging sideways glances, muttered words, the same familiar mixture of pity and contempt. "There goes Carter's girl," someone said under their breath. "Should have been taken by the state years ago," another replied. Mira kept her chin up, clutching the crumpled bills she'd saved from scavenging. At the pharmacy, the bell over the door jingled as she stepped inside. The warmth of the room hit her skin, but the cold in people's eyes never softened. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with pursed lips, narrowed her gaze. "We don't give credit, Mia. You know that." "I've got cash," Mia muttered, sliding the bills onto the counter. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "Just a cough medicine." The woman sighed, as though doing business with her was a personal insult. She turned, fetched the bottle, and dropped it on the counter like it was contaminated. Mia nodded, took the medicine, and left. The bell jangled behind her, followed by a whisper meant to be overheard. "Girls know better than the junk she digs through." Outside, the words stuck to her like the winter wind. She walked faster, holding the medicine close, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. What Mia didn't know was that Jack had followed. He wasn't strong enough yet for long distances, but he'd managed to reach town, moving slow, leaning on a cane he'd whittled from scrapwood. Duke padded beside him, steadying him with quiet loyalty. From across the street, Jack saw it all, the looks, the whispers, the way Mira kept her head high while the world tried to grind her down. His chest tightened. He'd spent his life fighting battles in foreign deserts, only to come home and see a child waging one every day against her own neighbors. When Mira turned the corner, Jack stepped into her path. She nearly dropped the medicine, eyes widening. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed. "If Hale's men see you, I had to," Jack said. His breath came hard, but his eyes were steady. "I had to see it for myself, what they put you through." Mia's jaw clenched. She wanted to brush it off, pretend it didn't matter, but her throat tightened, and for once, the words refused to come. Jack reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding. "Listen to me, Mia. I've seen cruelty. I've seen men like Haley twist the truth until people can't tell right from wrong. But I swear to you I won't let them break you. I won't let them touch your grandmother, as long as I draw breath. You're not alone in this fight." The wind whipped around them, carrying the sounds of a waking town for the first time. Mia felt the promise wasn't just words. It was a vow carved into the marrow of a man who had already lost too much to betray it. Duke pressed against Mia's leg, tail brushing her side. She looked down at the shepherd, then back at Jack. Something inside her, small but steady, began to believe. For years, she had carried the burden alone. Now, for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone else was willing to carry it with her. The winter sun had barely climbed above the skyline when two of Richard Hale's men trudged through the rusted gates of Old Man Holland's Junkyard. Their boots crunched over frozen ground, breath fogging in the bitter air. One of them, a broad man in a leather jacket, lifted a top off a Chevy Impala, muttering curses when he saw the bent latch of the trunk. "Somebody was here," he growled, pulling out a flashlight. The beam cut across the scuffed metal, lingering on the faint smear of dried blood. The other man crouched, running a gloved finger along the steel. "This is Donovan's car," he whispered. "He was here." The first man's lips twisted into a cruel grin. "Then Hale's gonna want this place turned inside out." Back in the shack, Jack was sharpening a broken piece of scrap metal into something resembling a knife. His ribs still ached, and his strength was slow to return. But his instincts were sharp as ever. He glanced at Mia, who tied her boots, preparing to head out. "You sure about this?" Jack asked. Mia adjusted the strap of her bag. "If I don't go, we don't eat. We're almost out of everything. Besides, I know the Junkyard better than anyone." Jack didn't argue, he just watched her go, Duke whining at the door until Mia crouched down and scratched behind his ears. "Stay," she whispered. The shepherd huffed, but she slipped out into the cold. The Junkyard was quieter than usual. No distant clang of metal, no crow picking through scraps, just the groan of old cars shifting under the weight of frost. Mia moved fast, ducking between piles of twisted steel, eyes sharp for anything worth a few dollars. But something felt wrong. She froze when she heard voices low, guttural, moving closer. Carefully, she peeked around the fender of a rusted pickup. Two men stood where the Chevy Impala had been, one pointing at the busted trunk. The other pulled out a phone, speaking fast, urgent. Mira's stomach tightened. She knew danger when she saw it. Those weren't scavengers. She started to back away, silent as a shadow, but her foot landed on a loose hubcap, sending it clattering across the ground. The men's heads snapped up. "Hey!" one shouted. "Over there!" Mia bolted, weaving through the maze of scrap like only she could. Her breath puffed white as her heart hammered in her chest. She darted between stacks of tires, crawled under a half-crushed van, but the men were faster than she expected. Footsteps thundered closer. A hand lunged for her coat. She twisted free, but another figure blocked her path. "Gotcha, you little." Before he could finish, a blur of fur and teeth slammed into him. Duke, the shepherd, barreled into the man, teeth sinking into his forearm. The thug screamed, thrashing, trying to shake the dog off. The second man raised a crowbar, ready to strike. Mia didn't think. She grabbed a length of pipe from the ground and swung with everything she had. The metal rang against his wrist, making him drop the weapon with a cursed, "Run, Mia." Jack's voice cut through the chaos. He was there, limping but upright, clutching the scrap knife he'd made. His face was pale, jaw clenched against pain, but his eyes blazed. Mia scrambled to her feet, Duke still snarling as he backed toward them, blood streaking his muzzle. The men cursed, retreating just enough to pull out their phones. "They'll call Hale," Jack rasped. "We've got minutes, maybe less." Together, they staggered out of the Junkyard, slipping through a gap in the fence Mia had used since childhood. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sound of shouts behind. By the time they reached the tree line, Jack had to lean against a trunk, every breath sharp with pain. Mia clutched Duke's fur, trembling. "They know," she whispered. "They'll find us." Jack nodded grimly. He wiped a streak of blood from his brow, eyes narrowing toward the town. "Then we move faster. We can't hide in the shadows anymore, not with Hale tightening the net. Time's running out." Mia looked at him, fear sparking in her chest. She'd lived her life one day at a time, surviving. Now she realized survival wasn't enough. They were in a war they hadn't chosen, and the enemy was closing in. Duke pressed against her side. Steady, protective, Jack's hand tightened on his makeshift blade. The game had changed, and the trail they'd left behind was burning like a fuse. The night had fallen heavy over the outskirts of town. Snow blanketed the fields, glowing faintly under the half-moon. The old barn where Jack, Mia, Evelyn, and Duke had taken refuge creaked with every gust of wind. Inside, the air was thin with smoke from the small fire, a fragile warmth against the bitter cold. Jack lay on his side, listening. His instincts, sharpened from years of service, refused to let him sleep. Every sound carried weight. The howl of wind through broken slats, the scuttle of a rat across loose hay. But then came something else. Tires crunching on frozen gravel, doors slamming, muffled voices. His hand shot to the knife he kept close. "Mia," he whispered. The girl stirred, eyes heavy with exhaustion until she saw the look on his face. Fear replaced sleep instantly. "They've found us." Outside, beams of flashlights cut through the snow. Hale's men spread out, dark figures fanning toward the barn. One barked an order, and the others moved with precision. These weren't drunks or thugs, they were soldiers once. Like Jack, paid to hunt, and paid well. Jack limped to his feet, his ribs screaming with each breath. "We move." Now, Mia grabbed her grandmother's hand, pulling Evelyn upright. The old woman swayed but managed, her determination stronger than her failing body. Duke rose to, limping on his injured paw but growling low, a sound that vibrated in the floorboards. The barn door rattled as someone yanked at the latch. "In here," a voice shouted. Jack shoved open the back hatch, a panel of rotted wood that gave way with a grunt. "Go." Mia slipped through first, snow crunching under her boots as she pulled Evelyn after her. Duke followed, his breath steaming in the frigid night. Jack went last, just as the front doors exploded inward with a crash. Shouts erupted. They're running." The chase tore into the night. Snow whipped against Mia's face as she plunged into the woods, branches clawing at her coat. Behind, the crunch of boots closed in fast, relentless. Jack forced his body forward, every stride of agony. But the thought of Hale's men laying hands on the girl or her grandmother burned hotter than pain. "Keep going," he called, voice hoarse. Flashlights flickered between trees, beams slicing through the dark. A bullet cracked past, splintering bark. Mia ducked, hard hammering, dragging Evelyn down a slope slick with ice. Duke lunged back toward the gunfire, teeth bared, a blur of muscle and fury. He slammed into one of the pursuers, knocking him hard into the snow. Snarls tore through the night as man and dog wrestled, blood-staining white ground. "Duke!" Mia screamed. Jack spun, dragging air into his battered lungs, and threw himself toward the struggle. He drove his makeshift blade into the attacker's shoulder, sending the man sprawling. But another figure was already raising a rifle. Duke leapt again, jaws clamping on the gunman's arm. The weapon discharged into the air, deafening in the still woods. The shepherd held on, but the effort cost him blood soaked into his fur, and his whimper cut sharp through the chaos. Jack grabbed Mira by the arm, pushing her forward. "We can't stop. Not now." Tears stung her eyes, but she obeyed, pulling Evelyn through the trees as Duke staggered beside them, still alive, still moving. The forest seemed endless, a tangle of shadow and snow. Their breaths came ragged, visible clouds swallowed by the dark. Behind them, voices barked orders, but the sound was fading. The wood swallowed everything but the pounding of their hearts. Finally, when Jack was sure his legs would give way, the trees opened into a frozen creek bed. He motioned them down, crouching in the icy hollow. "Quiet," he rasped. They pressed close together, breaths shallow. Snow fell soft, covering tracks, muting sound. The lights of their pursuers flickered in the distance, weaving through the trees before vanishing one by one. Only then did Mira dare look at Duke. His fur was matted, his breathing ragged. She laid a trembling hand on his neck. He pressed his head against her, tail giving the faintest thump in the snow, as if to tell her he was still there, still fighting. Jack leaned back against the frozen bank, eyes scanning the darkness. His body ached, his mind screamed to rest, but the truth was inescapable. Hale's men were closing in. They had found one hiding place, and they would find the next. "We can't stay here long," Jack said softly. "Every hour we have is borrowed. But I'll get you through this, both of you. I swear it." Mia tightened her grip on Duke, staring into the night where the hunters had disappeared. For the first time, the woods she had always known felt like a cage. The chase was far from over. The frozen creek bed stretched on like a silver scar through the woods. Their breaths puffed white, each step a battle against exhaustion. Jack limped ahead, scanning for movement, while Mia clung tightly to her grandmother's hand. Evelyn's frail body was trembling, her face pale beneath the dim moonlight. They had run too far, too fast. Suddenly Evelyn stopped, her weight collapsing into Mia's grasp. A violent cough tore from her chest, the sound ragged and deep. Red stained the snow as droplets of blood scattered across the icy ground. "Grandma," Mia cried, struggling to hold her up. "Please, just a little farther, please." Evelyn shook her head weakly, her lips curved into the faintest smile, though pain carved lines across her face. I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling with both weakness and love. "My time's run its course." Jack dropped beside them, his own chest heaving. He'd seen men die before brothers, lost in deserts and cities half a world away. But this was different. This was an old woman who had asked for nothing, who had taken him in despite danger, who had carried the weight of survival for her granddaughter. He could see it in her eyes. She knew this was the end. Mia clutched her hand tighter, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Don't say that. You're all I've got. You promised you'd stay." Another cough racked Evelyn's chest, this one heavier, blood staining her lips. She reached up with trembling fingers, brushing them against Mia's tear-streaked face. "You've always been stronger than you think. You must believe that you must live." Mia shook her head desperately. "No, I can't." Evelyn's hand pressed gently to her granddaughter's chest, over her heart. "Yes, you can. You must trust Jack Duke. They'll be with you now. But you must carry the fire forward, survive, for both of us." Her eyes lingered on Jack then, glossy but still sharp for a moment. "Protect her. Promise me." Jack's throat tightened. His voice, when it came, was rough with emotion. "I swear it." The old woman exhaled softly, her hand sliding from Mia's cheek to her lap. The faint smile lingered a moment longer, then faded as her body grew still. Silence fell over the creek bed, broken only by Mia's sobs. She bent over Evelyn's still form, her cries muffled against the old woman's coat. Duke Windlow, limping closer, lowering his head beside Mia's shoulder as though mourning with her. Jack stared at Evelyn's body, his fists clenched against the cold. He wanted to rage, to curse the unfairness of it or the cruelty of a world that stripped a child of everything good. But there was no time. Hale's men were still out there, and grief, however sharp, couldn't shield them. "Mia," Jack said softly, his voice trembled, but urgency threaded through it. "We have to move." "No." Mia's voice cracked as she clung to Evelyn's hand. "I'm not leaving her. I won't." Jack knelt beside her, forcing his own grief down so he could meet her eyes. "If we stay, they'll find us, and your grandmother, she gave her last breath to make sure you lived. Don't let her sacrifice be wasted." Mia's chest heaved with sobs, but Jack's words broke through the storm. Slowly, painfully, she loosened her grip. She pressed her forehead against Evelyn's one last time, whispering, "I love you." Snowflakes drifted silently onto Evelyn's still body as Mia rose, her small frame shaking. Jack placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward. Duke pressed against her side. Blood still matted his fur, but his presence solid, grounding. They left Evelyn beneath the blanket of snow and moonlight, each step away tearing at Mira's heart. She stumbled, and Jack caught her, pulling her close as they pushed deeper into the trees. Behind them, the night swallowed the creek bed. Hale's men would eventually find the trail, maybe even the body, but for now, there was only the cold, the darkness, and the weight of loss pressing them forward. Jack glanced at Mia, her eyes hollow, her face streaked with frozen tears. He knew that pain. He'd carried it once, when his own family had been lost to war's consequences. Now Mia bore the same wound, and he had sworn to protect her. The world had taken everything from her tonight, but it had not taken hope, not yet. Jack tightened his grip on the makeshift blade, scanning the forest ahead. "We keep moving," he murmured, more to himself than to her, for Evelyn, for what's right. "We don't stop until this is finished." Mia wiped her face, clutching Duke's fur with one hand. The shepherd leaned into her, limping but unbroken. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief, a spark flickered. Her grandmother's words echoed in her chest. "You must live." The night pressed on, cold and merciless, but so did they. The storm had quieted by the time Jack guided Mia and Duke through the skeletal trees. Snow crunched beneath their boots, the night still sharp with grief. Evelyn's absence pressed on them like a weight that would never lift. They stumbled upon the monastery just before dawn. Its stone walls, cracked and weathered by decades of abandonment, loomed like the bones of a forgotten age. Ivy clung stubbornly to the broken arches, and shattered stained glass hung jagged in their frames, glinting faintly in the pale moonlight. Jack eased open a heavy wooden door, its hinges groaning. Inside, the air was cold and damp, but sheltered. Rows of pews lay in disarray, some overturned, others split by rot. Dust and snow drifted in through holes in the roof, but compared to the open forest, it felt like sanctuary. "Here," Jack murmured, helping Mia to one of the benches. Her face was hollow, her small hands buried in Duke's fur. The dog lowered himself slowly at her side, still bleeding from his shoulder wound, but refusing to rest until she did. Jack lit a stub of candle he'd found in his pack, its flickering flame casting long shadows across the cracked altar. He tried not to think about the irony, seeking refuge in a place once meant for peace, while violence hunted them outside its walls. Mia broke the silence first, her voice a whisper. She loved this kind of place. Grandma always said churches were safe, even when they're broken. Jack sat down beside her, his hands clasped tight. He didn't know how to answer. Words felt too small against the hole death had torn open. Instead, he nodded, letting her lean against him as the candlelight trembled between them. Hours later, footsteps echoed softly against the stone floor. Jack shot up, blade in hand, every nerve bristling. Duke growled low, dragging himself forward despite his injury. "It's me," a voice called quietly. From the shadows emerged Mark Rivers. Snow clung to his beard, his breath heavy with the run. His eyes darted across the ruined hall before landing on Jack. Relief softened his features. "You're alive," Mark said. "Thank God." Jack lowered the blade but kept his stance guarded. "How did you find us?" Mark crossed the aisle, careful, respectful of Mia's exhausted state. "I've been tracking Hale's movements. He's losing control." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Mark leaned against a splintered pew, pulling a folded newspaper from his jacket. "Someone leaked documents to the press. Proof of Hale's deals, arms shipments, money laundering, even the operation where he left you to burn. It's all out there now." Jack took the paper, scanning the headlines in the candle's glow. Hale's face stared back at him, smug no longer but cornered. The articles were bold, damning. Mia looked up, her voice small but edged with hope. "Does that mean he can't hurt us anymore?" Mark hesitated. "It means he's wounded, exposed. But men like him, they don't go down quietly. He'll fight harder, dirtier, because he has nothing left to lose." Jack folded the paper, slipping it into his coat. His jaw tightened. "Then we finish this before he finishes us." Mia's hand found his. The first time since Evelyn's death. Her grip wasn't desperate, it was steady, fueled by something that felt like resolve. Duke thumped his tail once against the stone. As if echoing her strength, the candle guttered nearly out. But in the ruins of the monastery, a fragile sense of direction took root. Hale's power was slipping, and Jack knew the time was coming when running would no longer be enough. They had to strike back. The first light of dawn crept through the broken arches of the monastery, painting the stone floor in soft gold. For hours, silence had hung heavy over the ruin, broken only by the rustle of wind through shattered glass and the steady breathing of the three who had survived the night. Mia stirred first. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but something in her expression had shifted. The grief was still there, but beneath it burned a quiet resilience. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind, like a flame that refused to die out. "Mia, confi can tongue va santip." She sat up, stroking Duke's fur where he lay curled at her side. The shepherd's breathing was labored, his wounds bandaged clumsily but holding. He lifted his head, eyes following her with unshaken loyalty. For the first time since her grandmother's collapse, Mia smiled, faint but true. "We're still here," she whispered to him. "We're not done yet." Across the hall, Jack Donovan watched her. He looked older than his years, and the pale light scars visible not only on his skin but in the set of his jaw. The heaviness in his gaze. Yet there was something else, something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of purpose, bigger than his own survival. He walked over and crouched beside her. "You've got your grandmother's strength," he said softly. "She'd be proud of you." Mia's eyes glistened, and she nodded. "She wanted me to live, not just survive, but really live. I don't know how to do that anymore." Jack hesitated, then placed a rough, weathered hand on her shoulder. "Maybe I can help with that?" She looked at him, questioning. "I can't bring her back," Jack said, voice thick. "But I can give you something she would have wanted for you, a home, a family. You don't have to walk this road alone anymore, Mia. Not while I'm still breathing." The words landed heavy between them, but they didn't feel like pity. They felt like a vow. Mia's chest tightened, tears threatening again, though this time they weren't only from sorrow. "You mean like a father?" she asked quietly. Jack's throat worked before he answered, "Yeah, if you'll have me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Mia leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was an embrace fierce and trembling, filled with loss but also with something new, hope. Jack held her close, a man who had seen war and betrayal, now finding a cause worth bleeding for. Duke gave a low bark, as if sealing the promise. When they finally rose, the sky had opened into a clear morning. Snow still covered the earth, but the light made it sparkle, as though even winter was forced to admit the presence of warmth. Jack tightened his coat and helped Mira to her feet. Duke limped beside them, head high, despite his pain. Together, they stepped out of the monastery's shadow and onto the path that stretched north. Behind them lay grief and betrayal. Ahead lay danger, still sharpened by Richard Hale's pursuit, but something fundamental had changed. They were no longer just survivors bound by circumstance. They were family, chosen in the crucible of loss. At the crest of the hill, Mia paused, looking back one last time at the crumbling monastery. Then she turned forward, her small hand slipping into Jack's. The sun broke fully over the horizon, washing their faces in gold. 3 figuresmen, girl, and dog walked steadily into the dawn, no longer running but ready. For the first time in years, Jack felt it. The war wasn't over, but neither was the fight for something worth living for, and together they would face the darkness still waiting beyond the light.